Welcome to the webinar today. We're really excited about the topic we're going to be talking about in just a few minutes. The title of today is the top legal trends that ministries are facing. And I'm so glad to have two really good experts in the field around the content that we're going to be discussing today. I was thinking about this as we were, preparing to have the webinar, and I thought, I'm going to introduce you today to two men that you really probably need to know, but you hope you never have to talk to. And that is an insurance agent and a lawyer, an attorney. You better have them on your side, but it's always best when you don't need them, but they're there. And I get that. And I'm sure they would probably say that from a different angle as well. So let me just, as we kind of jump into this in just a moment, introduce who we have today. And of course, I'm Dr. Rodney Agan. I'm the CEO of Simple Ministry. And really the purpose of these webinars is to equip churches, ministries, nonprofits with the tools and resources that you need that can really help you not only to succeed, but to make sure you don't fail and you do things, obviously decently and in order and all of those things. And so we've had a number of other type webinars in this series, and we have some more to come. And so hopefully you're finding value out of these webinars. So I'm glad to have today, and I'll let them take a moment and introduce themselves. But first is Michael Campbell. He's the president of Ministries Sure. And then our content expert today is Robert Luskin, and he's an attorney with Chartwell Law he's based in Atlanta, Georgia. So Michael, why don't you go ahead and introduce, and then Robert, feel free to say whatever you'd like.
Thank you, Rodney. Michael Campbell, Ministry Sure Insurance Agency. We serve ministries on the insurance side and risk management solutions, and are so excited to chat about legal trends and how we can protect the church.
Good.
Good afternoon. Robert Luskin over at Chartwell Law here in Atlanta. I've had the pleasure of working with Michael for many years, but I have been practicing about almost 23 years last week. And a vast majority of what I've done over those years has been representing churches, religious organizations, private schools, both on the carrier, from carriers when sometimes things happen, but also religious organizations and ministries directly to help them avoid risk where they can, manage risk when risk occurs, and then if things happen, there to help guide them through the process. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk to everybody.
Well, good. Thank you, men, for being on today. And if you're listening to the webinar, hang on toward the end. We're going to offer and have an opportunity to give you a free download on just maybe a nonprofit facility use checklist, some things that you can kind of make sure that you're staying in compliance. And we want to give that to you. And thank you for joining us today. So, Robert, let me just start with the first question and kind of get things rolling. What are some of the legal trends that you're seeing for ministries today?
I appreciate it. That's usually a great way to start. And one of the things I will say is that, in the past, you might have thought, well, hey, we're a ministry, nobody's going to sue us. That's just not true. I wish it was, but it's not. And so the first thing I will say as a legal trend is just go to this really true to the start, which is there are a lot of lawyers. There are a lot of people that will, we see it on the advertising. You see it on the billboard, you see it on the TVs, the TV commercials. There are a lot of folks that will sue regardless of what it is. And there is a belief, we're working with it in the legal industry, talking about anchoring and things like that. And what that means is, it's messaging. And the message is out there is you're really not suing the ministry. You're really not suing the church.
Yeah.
You're suing the insurance company. And so the number one trend I see is just a willingness to file suit very quickly before any real thought process ever went into place. Is one, is this something that is suit worthy, Or two, is this something that really I should be filing suit on versus seeing if there's a way to just resolve it? This isn't to say that people aren't injured at, facilities, at churches during a ministry operation, and don't deserve to be compensated for their injuries. But the suit happiness has really gone through the roof, and that's increased. I mean, it's increased my work. It's increased the stress on folks like Michael and insurance carriers out there, but it also has increased the cost to the ministries out there to make sure that they're protected. And that is a huge legal trend that we see. And it's from everything from church picnics to weddings to events that occur at churches to you have recreational property that you make available, playgrounds, fields for people to come out and have fun in. It's made it very difficult, and it has started impacting the world we live in.
Michael, why don't you speak into that too from an insurance perspective? I'd love to hear both of these sides to that.
Yeah, I would just want to mention too, just to emphasize the impact. People think, oh, if I sue, it's just this big bad insurance carrier out there, and it's not really going to affect anyone. And I'll give you, three specific examples of how it does impact the church on a negative side. One is reputational harm, right? The church is being sued. Now they're splashed potentially in the newspaper or on TV or whatever. And so they suffer some reputational harm. Also trust, all that publicity and press, can cause some reputational harm and some relational harm with their church membership, as well as the people that they're trying to impact. And also probably the last, on that totem pole would be the ability to find protection. And that's where we kind of come in on the insurance side, because, the carrier doesn't have the whole picture. They just see the numbers on paper. And, unless they're committed to the space, and you're working with a specific church insurance provider, a lot of times they're going to say no on principle because you got a $150,000 open liability claim because someone got hurt on the at the church or at the facilities. And, they have to make a quick judgment, a snap judgment, and they don't have time to review all these files and caveats and everything else. So, there's real impact. To give you some sense too, just from dollars and cents, maybe they're not cutting a check directly to the claimant, but their insurance premium, they may be getting dropped or the premiums may go up 3 to 4 times what they were paying. I have ministries right now. I have one church as an open abuse claim. They got dropped and they went from 60,000 to 350,000 overnight, just like that, because nobody wants to pick up that exposure. No one wants to jump on, an open liability claim. And so when you sue, it's not nebulous. There's real reputational ministry impact that happens. And biblically, if you just read Matthew 18, it talks about trying to resolve things first.
Yeah.
So,
Robert, I know you're a wealth of knowledge in this, so just go a little deeper into some of these thoughts.
Sure.
I know you have a lot of things that you can help us with there.
Sure. Yeah. So, for example, I use a really good example. From a legal trend perspective, we're seeing more and more impact on just general, I call it head scratching things. So, you've got a church, and the folks have been coming to that church for years. That church has been there, same stairs that have been there for 50 years. They get painted, they're maintained, but they're the stairs. People go up and down those stairs every Sunday, sometimes 2 or 3 times. Maybe it's on a Wednesday. Maybe they're out there on something else. Suddenly somebody falls. And the first thought generally is not, oh, I'm going to sue, but they start talking to people. They start seeing advertisements. And so now there's a lack of, there's that personal responsibility that sometimes goes away. Now, maybe there was something wrong with those stairs. I'm not casting aspersions here. Maybe there was something wrong with those stairs. That's something that needs to be looked at. But if these are the same stairs that people have been going up and down for 50 years, including the person who fell, there are certain legal defenses there. One of the other legal things that I see, or trends I'm seeing more and more of, is ministries and churches are getting sort of brought into matters that don't directly involve them. So things that are outside of your control. Your group is over at a third-party facility. Maybe they're doing a youth group trip. Something happens during that trip. Somebody gets injured at a jumpy place, or somebody gets injured while they're doing a scavenger hunt for youth group. I think, everybody's playing, pickleball and things like that. Somebody gets injured. Well, it's not just the facility that's getting, named. Maybe the facility or the location that you were working with has various waivers, and that's something that we work with quite frequently, is the use of waivers. But you're getting brought into it. And so we're going to throw everybody into the pot, and we'll just figure it out later. So things that churches and ministries don't have direct control over is another thing that they're finding themselves brought more and more into.
People are just looking for multiple pockets.
Right.
Who's the deepest and who's the second. And
yeah, I mean, and there's, there are pleas to, you talked about reputational issues, Michael. I mean, there are pleas to the social side of it, which is, look, you're a church, you're a ministry. This is going to impact your fundraising. This is going to impact, your church, membership. Depending on the type of claim, and some of our claims are very, very sensitive and very, very sad, whether it's a misconduct claim, but some of them are really, just everyday run-of-the-mill cases. I do say this, and some people, like I said, I've been doing ministry work and work with churches for many, many years. And one of the things I have learned over the years is the way ministries and things like that are looked at from outside in the legal world is it's almost looked like a retail operation. And if you think about it, you're like, wait a minute, that's not us. And so I just bear with me for a second and I'll explain why. If you're going to go into a department store, stores open for certain hours. You walk in, you go through doors, you walk around, you're trying on clothes, you're looking at, whatever it is you're going to buy. Maybe you find what you're looking for, maybe you don't. You leave, there's a parking lot, there's lighting, there are cars all around. Now, substitute department store for church. It's exactly the same thing. You have people, any place you have people, cars, and lighting, and a physical presence, something can happen to somebody. And that's how the folks that are getting involved in the lawsuits are viewing things. And so what we can do, and what we've tried to start doing, is try to minimize those risks where we can, mitigate those risks where we can, set folks up for the best possible defense and or result, and avoid things where you can. Sometimes the best defense is a good offense. And here, there are certain things that are within the control that you can deal with. I mean, here in Georgia, we've got a huge, it's not exactly the best place to practice law. If you're a defense lawyer at times, it's not the best place to be a defendant, but that doesn't, there are still very good folks. And as a general rule, jurors, if you had to take it all the way to a trial, still take their job very seriously and take their issues to heart.
Can I ask a question too? I think this affects, I would hope it would affect almost every church, but maybe most. Most churches, or a lot of churches, take mission trips, for instance, going out of the country. Risk waivers are signed or whatever. How effective are those and that kind of thing? Is that a fair question to ask?
Absolutely. So it's going to be state by state. So here in Georgia, waivers are good. And I say that, I mean, waivers are enforceable. They have to be properly worded. You cannot waive what's known as gross negligence. Okay. So you can't, but you can waive general negligence. You can say, look, I'm going on a trip. I acknowledge I'm going on a trip, and I'm going to agree that if something happens on that trip, I'm waiving my rights to sue you based upon just the general negligence, the good old fashioned mistakes happen type. Now, if something that is grossly negligent, no, that's different. And those waivers have been shown to be enforceable on those issues. Now, each state is different. There are some states out there that a waiver is not worth the paper it's printed on. There are some states that it is absolutely, if you have a waiver, it's done. Same thing for like arbitration provisions. That's a hot topic right now. Okay. Everybody's out there. So, but arbitration provisions are enforceable if in your employment context.
Robert, one of the things that's been on my mind, a lot is, the shifting change. You mentioned it earlier about, people's view on whether to go after the church, whether to sue the church. And, what I see oftentimes is that it seems like litigation is made light of. I was at the Braves game, we're watching the guy running down the field and the Home Depot hammer and chasing whatever. And then you see the flex cam come up there with John Foy, strong arm of the law, and everyone's laughing, having a great time and showing off their muscles and whatever. And it's almost like they're making light of suing people rather than pushing into relationships and trying to work things out. It's like going straight to the panic button and suing people. And I wanted to ask you, what are some of the biggest threats that you see the church is facing in this current environment, and perhaps maybe illuminate some things that you see that they could do right off the bat that, broad strokes.
Sure. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, there is this idea that, you see it in the advertisements, the bad insurance company. That's sort of like it's an instant adversarial relationship from the first moment. And so I think one of the things that can be done by churches to help alleviate that is really focusing on your relationship with the folks in the church. What I have learned over the years is, especially when I'm dealing with employment matters, I do a lot of employment work, and it's something that's one of those things that I shouldn't have had to think about it, but I did. Angry people sue. Happy people don't. And I don't say that to mean like happy in the sense of they got money or they didn't get money. If they feel like they've been not listened to, they feel like they've been wronged, they weren't paid attention to, that's when people sue. Now, this is a broad stroke. I'm not saying this is 80%, 90% of the time, but I say it's a majority of the time. So for example, you're going to have to part ways with somebody. You know what? It's not working out in as an employment relationship. And you have to let them go. And it's not going to be a pleasant conversation. They probably knew it's coming, but it's not going to be a pleasant conversation. And you can do it the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, or you could probably hold on, maybe find a way to stretch it out a little bit longer. Now, there are some times when you need to go ahead and do it the Tuesday before Thanksgiving because it's of it's a nature you can't wait any longer. This is an important issue. People who get fired or let go over the holidays, they're not happy. It's a sad time. They're going to go find a lawyer. Somebody who has said, look, it's the second week of January. We need to part ways. They're not going to be happy, but maybe they're a little bit more understanding. Or like, okay, thank you. I get it. We're going to go different ways. We're going to find a way to work with you. So working ahead and really paying attention, and on the ministry side, don't just jump to the first reaction. Take a step back, think, and don't try not to be reactionary to things, because it may be one of these things like, I can't believe they did that. Let's let them go. Okay, do we have the proper documentation? Have we been keeping track of everything? Same thing on a slip and fall or a trip and fall. Somebody fell on our property. Are we caring for them? Are we making sure making sure they're okay? Are we checking in with them? Those type things will make people feel like they're being listened to and less likely to immediately go and find somebody.
So what I'm hearing you say, though, is the emotional state of the individual matters, and how you mirror their frustrations and allow them to communicate their, hurts, damages, whatever matters.
Yes, 100%. I really think that is, especially in today's society and the things that we hear with, because I talk to folks, and a lot of times, and through once we get into litigation, I don't get a chance to talk to folks. Now you got to go through lawyers, and it becomes very impersonal. Anytime I talk to somebody, their lawyer's got to be there. But what we do learn through a process that usually happens in almost every case called mediation, we ratchet it back down. The goal is you ratchet back down, you see if you can find a way to resolve the issues. And one of the things that we often hear about is from a third party who's working with us is like what really brought this about? Like is this case really need to get settled? And most of the time on cases that come in that really should never have been a case, it's because folks feel they may not have heard what was being said, so to speak, but they feel like they weren't listened to.
Yeah, the hard part is when something's super egregious, right?
Different.
Church obviously made a mistake. There's those times where they just got to admit, hey, our ministry made a mistake.
Yes. No, absolutely. That's the other thing. It's if you make a mistake, you do what you basically, if you make a mistake, you own it. That doesn't necessarily mean that, you need to go out there and broadcast it. But if you made a mistake, then you work with advisors to help rectify the situation.
I was thinking about a term I think you used a little earlier, maybe around the risk waiver thing, but what was the intent? Or to me, there's a fine line here. And I'm curious, how do juries, judges, lawsuits, how do you marry that a church intended to do right, but they didn't dot all their I's or their T's, cross their T's kind of thing?
Sure. And that does come into play some where it's like, okay, did you could have done better kind of thing. And that happens. And you gotta, in our world, you gotta own it sometimes. You say, you know what, we could have done better.
Let me go a little deeper too on a kind of a shift in this. I know we're talking about, possible slips and falls or all those kinds of things. What about one of the biggest elephant in the room we hear a lot about now is like sexual abuse, volunteers, paid employees, pastors. What are some ways that a church can really start going, this is something I need to do well, because this could totally kill our reputation as well as harm someone as well, a victim, and we don't want to do either.
Absolutely. No. And that is true. I mean, like somebody slips and falls on your property, and they get injured. It's sad, but these are what you're talking about are things that are beyond reputational. I mean, they're reputational. They are awful situations for all involved.
Correct.
And so a lot of it is on the front end. Okay. These are things that are, sometimes just like can just end, it's a ministry killer.
Yeah.
And so a lot of things are on the front end. You can only do so much. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
I've taken a lot of expert depositions. You can talk to a lot of, you can only do so much, but you need to be cognizant of what's going on, doing your background checks, making sure that you have true training. I mean, one of the things that has happened is, especially in the Zoom world, in those things, is it's easy to do training and be like, click, 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 thank you.
Yeah.
No, and there's nothing, I'm not saying that's wrong, that you shouldn't do training sessions online. It's a great opportunity for those that may otherwise would have to take a day off of work. But if you have paid employees, absolutely making sure that they're properly trained, having proper, background checks, making sure things are updated. I mean, I've seen frequently situations where, well, so and so started working with us in 2017 and we did a background check. Okay. And we did training then, but then it doesn't ever get updated. And now we're 2024, it's 7 years later. And so those are all things, you know, making sure you have proper supervision, making sure you have the proper, situations where you don't have one-on-one contact. Those type things are musts. But they're also things that can show we really did everything we could. We did it by the book. We did everything we could on this. We care about you. We care about this situation. And we are sorry that it happened. But look, here are all the things that we did. It puts you it puts you legally in a much better position. But two, it also puts you, in a much better position in the light of a jury.
I know a lot of times churches get in trouble because of a lack of transparency when something does happen, and that hurts. And so I want you to speak into that. And then also a dovetail question on that you just brought up that I've never thought about. How often should you do a background check?
Sure. Okay. So to the second one, I'll answer first, which is obviously pay attention to your local jurisdiction, wherever you might be. There are certain things that have some states and local, has certain requirements. Depending on your church or ministry affiliation, make sure you know what maybe a larger organizational and body might require. So follow the rules. That's number one. The question is going to be reasonableness. You don't have to do one every, it's like if I do one every year, what if something happens on a year and a day? You kind of like it's a catch-22. I say act reasonably. That's what I usually tell folks. Obviously if at any point in time you have belief that there's something going on, or there's something that's out there, you should update it. If you have folks that are authorized drivers, you don't need to do an MVR every 6 weeks, but I think a fair time to do one, and most carriers would probably require you to do one at the time, renewal. I don't think that's a bad thing. It's kind of like changing. The cost is not very high. The cost, if you don't do it, can be through the roof. And so, for example, and to be honest with you, I don't know that anybody does it this frequently, but when you're going to renew your insurance, that's a good time to do it. If you have some type of changing condition, hey, we're getting a new, 2 new vans. It's not that bad, but you're better off. It helps you deal with it down the road. If you're like, hey, I did an MVR every year or every 2 years, now people are gonna be like, yeah, that's more than my employer does, and I drive for them.
I was going to mention, so when we're advising insureds, if you think about flipping the script a little bit, and I am in front of a jury of my peers as a church leader, what am I going to tell them? It's to influence that jury of your peers that we did react to the situation or act up to the situation in a kind, prudent way, in a way that was thoughtful, intentional, and not negligent. One of the reasons we recommend, that churches retain counsel is so they can be able to call someone perhaps when they're emotionally compromised and hit the pause button. And someone like Robert can listen and say, hey, take a beat. Let's drop that anxiety. And we do the same thing from a risk management standpoint when I'm the first call. And the first thing I'm trying to do is get them to calm down and discuss what actually happened. and also decide, hey, what's the most prudent step that we can do right now. The other piece is that, if part of what I see with retaining counsel is that if advice is given, by someone that's qualified like Robert, it's much more difficult for a jury of their peers, for a prosecutor to convict a ministry leader of, lack of care or whatever, if that advice has been followed to a T. And when that administrator realized, oh man, I'm in trouble mentally, emotionally, physically, whatever, and they sought professional counsel. It's much tougher to claim that person acted irrationally because they did hit the pause button and they did try to clear their mind and they did seek help.
One thing, it's sort of I think a good point. It's sort of like also, I always tell folks, 2.5 years from now, 3 years from now, when you're on the stand having to explain what happened, are you going to be comfortable explaining what you did after the fact, but what you did before? And one thing I want to point out, and it's something I always work with my ministries that I work with, is a couple of sort of reminders, quick takeaways for people. If you have policies and procedures, and you should, and if you have a handbook, and you should, you have to follow it. The worst thing that's out there is if you have policies, procedures, and handbooks, and you're like, you're supposed to do X, and you decide not to. Now, instead of saying, I followed the procedure in the book, you've got to say, well, the reason I didn't follow the procedure this time was, now you've got some explaining to do. Likewise, and a lot of those policies, procedures, handbooks also are inclusive of times where when do you have to do the background checks? Are there conflict of interest processes, reporting issues? And then the second thing, in a lot of ministries, it's so easy now to have video, right? I mean, everybody's got Ring cameras and everything under the sun. And that's fine. If you have video and you have whether it's at the church or if you have video on the property, and you get notice of something, please save it. You want to save it. Try. If you don't save it, now the questions are going to be like, well, why not? Now it could be we didn't save it because we didn't find out about it for 5 weeks and it's already overwritten. That's fine. That's a reasonable expectation. But if you find out on day 3 and no one bothered to go look and see what it might have shown, and even save it, this is sort of the last thing is, if you look at the video and it doesn't show anything, save it anyway.
Well, that's good. Yeah.
Because you might get up there and say, well, yes, I'm aware that, somebody says they fell in the parking lot and that camera is actually angled so it didn't show anything, so we didn't save it. Instead of just saying, yes, I know this is a video of nothing, but see, it's a video of nothing. That will help you because when an attorney is trying to decide, are they going to push this case forward? Or a plaintiff is starting to decide, are they going to push this matter forward? If you're able to say, look, here it is, here's the video. They're walking along, they're on their phone, and they, tripped and fell. It's much more powerful, and you're much less likely to either get a suit or get something that you're going to have to deal with later.
I know I'm speaking to a lawyer and an insurance professional, so I get that as I ask this question. But when you're talking about policies and procedures, do you think sometimes less is more? Because we do have to follow everything we say.
Yes. I think less can be more as long as what you're doing is appropriate. So you don't want to leave holes. You're never going to have a policy and procedure for everything. We don't need a book of 172. It's like the tax code, So we don't need that. But there are certain things that everybody should follow, and you need to make sure that you have it. One, that's important for getting your insurance. Almost all carriers give reductions and discounts based upon policies, procedures, handbooks. Two, it can't be so big that folks haven't read it. But in certain states, depending on your state, the signature on the agreement is not a contract. We don't have a contract of employment unless it's a specific contract. But you're acknowledging that you've read it. And so there are certain defenses that come with that. If you sign something and you say, okay, I'm signing it, and on page 23, there's something that says that if you're faced with a certain situation, you're supposed to report it, and you don't, well, you said that you knew that you were supposed to report it. Likewise, if it's too big and too cumbersome, or I call them Frankenstein policies and procedures, where you've taken one from column A and two from column B, and you've kind of manufactured it, and now you have inconsistencies. I'm supposed to report it to John in HR. Oh, wait a minute, down here, I'm supposed to report it to Sally in facilities. Well, that's going to be construed against what's called the maker. So that's going to be, they're going to look at it and say, I didn't know what I was supposed to do. It wasn't my policy. It was the ministry's. So the court's going to say, that's against you, buddy.
And I'm assuming in today's world, it's perfectly fine to just get Chat GPT, throw together a document and call it a legal go, right?
Yeah, it would be interesting to see. I have actually done that. I've run some policies and procedures and said, do me a policy of this. Yeah. And some of it is interesting and some of it's like, wow, because it's not going to be specific to certain states and jurisdictions. And so it's always good to have it. And it's always good to have a refresher. You might have a great policy and procedure, but laws change.
Yeah.
So I was going to mention that to you. This is just coming from a carrier's perspective. The expectation as far as an outlier is that the carrier, especially if you're wanting limits of at least $1 million for abuse, molestation liability, or employment practices liability, their expectation is that you're going to review your ministry personnel manual at least every 5 years. Otherwise, more than likely, they'll either exclude that coverage, reduce that coverage, or demand that legal review occur. Same with the child protection policy. So, that's kind of the outlier. You mentioned, Rodney, earlier, how often should they get background checks and things like that? Well, from the carrier's perspective, when we're talking with multiple carriers and discussing the church risk or the ministry risk with the underwriter, they're going to say, well, when was the last time they took their handbook and abuse prevention policy and submitted them to local counsel and said, and checked for those inconsistencies and checked for those changes in the law in their area, in their jurisdiction, and made the appropriate adjustments. Hey, we can't be on that. Your house is on fire right now. Your ministry's on fire. This policy is on fire right now, and that's a claim waiting to happen.
So, Robert, one question we've asked in every webinar from each perspective: if you were advising a leadership team of a church or ministry, and they're tight budgets, everybody is, we understand all that, and so they're working on this next year. So let's say this is what we ask. They have $2,500 they could put to something. What would you advise should be their top priorities that they might want to focus on?
So I think the top priority is almost very similar to what Michael just said. Make sure your policies and procedures and your facilities arrangements are updated. There are many, and one that's it's something that can be done fairly inexpensively. I do these a lot of times for folks.
I'll just be honest, I've never heard a lawyer or an attorney use those terms before, inexpensively. So I'm glad to hear that. That's encouragement.
It can be done because as long as you're not writing one from scratch.
Yeah, I get it.
But no, you're right. It's just that is the best thing I can tell folks is, and then you use the policies and procedures in training. So you don't just write it.
That's good.
And then put it up on a shelf. So the best thing I can tell folks is spend 5 hours. First, do a review yourself, because when's the last time, I ask churches all the time when I go see them. When's the last time you actually read your own policies and procedures? Especially when you have turnover in church leadership, deacons, whatever the case may be. When's the last time you actually read it? What is it you're supposed to be doing versus what are you doing? And it's eye-opening. And then revamp it as needed because of a change in, change in law, a change in what's going on out there. Could be legal, could be, in society. 10 years ago, you probably didn't have a social media use policy.
Yeah.
Right now, every ministry has a social media use policy. But are you going too far? Because you got to be careful because the Department of Labor says, well, you can't say everything. And so making sure that you're doing a right balance, and then use the guidelines and your handbook in a training session with your paid staff, and then cull it down and use it in your training session with your volunteer staff. Because then if something happens, you do have policies and procedures in place. Everybody's going to have to say, yes, actually, we were told last year about this. Whether that's on the employment side, so if you have an issue with an employee, whether it's on the facility side, yes, we knew what we were supposed to do. Yes, we do, we check lighting, quarterly or every 30 days. If I see a light, it's a see something, say something. If I see a light out, I'm supposed to say it. That's how I would say is you'd spend $2,500. I think you get your most bang for your buck right there.
And the average church, from what we understand in America, really runs under 100 people. So there are a lot more small churches than mid-size and especially mega. But a lot of the churches that are not that large might tend to think, well, we're not one of those big churches. We don't need all of this. Speak into that before we go.
It doesn't matter about your size. And we could sit here and we could talk for hours and hours and hours about churches that a majority of the church is actually related to each other. We have some small churches in Georgia, and any state, no matter where you are, where it's like, well, this church was started by the Jones family, and everybody in the church is either a Jones or a Smith. And at one point in time, the Jones and Smiths got married. That doesn't mean that you're not getting sued.
Yeah.
So lawsuits and claims, don't care about size. It is a bigger impact on a small ministry. If you're a mega church, if you're a big church, it could have a huge impact. But if you lose 50 people, depending on who those 50 people are, I get it. But you lose 50 people or you get caught up in litigation, it's not as big a hit. If you're in a church of 85 people and 20 people go and leave, that's a percentage-wise is a huge impact. The other thing is most small and medium-sized churches, 100 or under, don't have a full-time HR person. Maybe they've got 10 people that are on staff in some form or fashion. Even some of the bigger ones, 250, 300, 400, they have the secretary of the pastor is also HR. And so sometimes things are, well, we've always done it that way. And that may be fine and it may be right until it's a problem. And then you've got, to deal with issues. And, people, again, happy people don't file lawsuits.
Yeah. And I'd say, to speak to that just a little bit more, there's very few people that want to submit themselves to a background check. It starts with the leader right at the top. The pastor needs to be the first person to volunteer.
Yeah.
Subject themselves to an MBR report, a background check, and clearly communicate from the pulpit that we need to do this to protect ourselves, as well as when we're in front of a jury, our peers were able to say, yes, we were the first to say yes. And, if it does flag something, then they need to come forward and say, you know what, I'm not the best person to drive the bus. I got a DUI over the weekend.
Yeah. Well, Robert, do any wrap up we've missed questions or something that you would like to bring up to help us before we start wrapping the webinar up? I'd love to hear,
Sure. Yeah, no, I think we've covered a lot of things. I mean, there's a lot of things that face ministries out there. Um, I always encourage folks to, as part of your annual, maybe most people do annual budgeting or annual planning process, put an hour on the agenda and do a true introspective look of when is the last time we did anything? When is the last time we did a policy review?
Yeah.
When, do we actually have a personnel handbook? Have we had a huge increase in hiring? Um, do we actually have people properly, are they independent contractors or are they employees? These are things that you're like, oh my goodness, what do I do? But spend an hour, take a look. And the other thing I will say is we are creatures of habit. We go in the same door at the church every single time. We park in the same general area. And if somebody's parked where you normally park, it's throwing you off.
Yeah.
As member, whatever ministry you have, whatever property you have, make sure you take that time and you walk around it. Walk around the church. Things will jump out at you. You may never have, I mean, it may have been years since you were in, a part of the soccer field. Just walk around it. Because later on, if somebody asks, when's the last time you did that? We do it annually.
Yeah, and I've often said too, it's not even a bad idea to have a quote unquote secret shopper kind of person that sees with fresh eyes. That's good. So
Yep.
any last words before we go? And then I want Michael to jump in as well and give us some last words with that, and then I'll wrap us up.
No, I appreciate the opportunity to chat with everybody. This is it's something I've been doing for 20 plus years. I enjoy it. I enjoy the folks I work with. We have a great team here at my firm, and we across the Southeast and across the country. And I think the way we started this is like the folks that you don't often want to hear from are lawyers and insurance folks. And I say this every time when I go to have an initial meeting with a client is, I love meeting interesting people. I love meeting folks. I hope you never have to talk to me again.
Yeah. Yeah. If someone wants to get a hold of you, we'll try to have that information available as well. But you want to tell us as well if they
Sure.
your services.
Sure. The best way to get me is my email. It's, we're stuck to our phones. But that's it's again, my name is Robert Luskin. The email address is rluskin, RLUSKIN at chartwelllaw.com. That's CHARTWELLLAW.com. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Michael?
Michael Campbell, Ministry Sure, and you can reach us at ministrysure.com and Mike at ministrysure.com. And I just wanted to leave with, our goal would be to, I just want to encourage ministries to seek wise counsel. The people that are sitting at their leadership table are so invaluable in helping ministries make wise choices. And, having a good risk manager and legal professional is a good start.
Yeah, of course, I'm Rodney Agan, simpleministry.org. We have a number of tools, processes, coaching, consulting we do for ministries. Love to help you with any of that if that comes across your needs list. So we're also going to try to have available for you a nonprofit facility use checklist that we can give you as well. So feel free to reach out in any way we can help and serve you. We're here to do that. Thanks again, Robert and Michael, for being on today and your expertise and your knowledge. Hopefully it's going to save a lot of heartaches for some ministry leaders. And I would just leave you as ministry leaders with this piece of advice. Don't just hear only, do what you've heard. So that's a thing we all want to do. Well, thanks again and have a great day.